Hello everyone, this is update for March 29, 2023, days 399 of the war and of the date update. This is also catch-up update for March 27 and 28. There's really not much going on the front line and in general strategically in the world. So this is going to be pretty short. I'm just going to quickly cover most important strategic events that happened over this time. So as always, let's start with China because it's a sort of newsmaker. And so what's going on with China is that it's continuing its push to replace US dollar in trade with energy, just generally attempting to replace US dollar with its national currency, yuan. So there was an announcement that today China purchased LNG from United Arab Emirates and paid in yuan. Then sort of related news to this is Saudi Arabia is planning to join Shanghai Organization for Cooperation. I mean, it's an essential organization that's viewed where the leader is China. I'm not saying that China dictates there, but sort of informal leader, because there's also Russia there. There is India, who is total rival of China. At the same time, this is the sort of, I wouldn't say sphere of influence, but this is at this point it's becoming kind of like the sphere of influence of China, or countries that somewhat aligned with China. So Saudi Arabia again joining that, planning to join that organization. That's obviously no surprise, given the whole diplomatic win that China had with Saudi Arabia by essentially arranging peace deal with Iran, as you remember, and also that's essentially stopping war in Yemen. So that creates, excellent, opportunity for Saudi Arabia, solve a lot of its, internal problems. The whole attack on U.S. dollar as global reserve currency continues. Not only it doesn't stop in Persian Gulf. The Kenyan president, so Kenya is in country in Eastern Africa, which I would say pretty as close as it gets pro-Western country, and this is very sort of interesting that the president in the country is calling to get rid of. Basically, he made an announcement to the population saying, please get rid of US dollars, they're going to become worthless soon. At the same time, he signed agreement to buy crude oil from UAE and Saudi Arabia in Kenyan currency. So what it seems like that's happening, because all of these currencies, they're not true sort of money, not true currencies, they just means of exchange. So it seems that a lot of this energy trade is based, essentially, the currency really is not even needed. It's essentially like a barter trade where the currency is just nominally tool to exchange the goods, but it's essentially barter because there is something of value for both sides. There is observable price in US dollars. You convert it into your local currency. So all you need to do is just make sure that transaction is happening nominally in your sort of local currency, but nobody has attention to, let's say, keep Kenyan currency or Chinese currency. Then everything is going to be, once the money reach the bank, it will be exchanged into currency that's used to sort of save money, basically, into capital, and that's obviously not yuan and not Kenyan currency, not any of those currencies, and for that reason, threat to US dollar, while it looks very threatening, I don't think it's a real one, because what determines the the global sort of currency is the capital, like how people keep their capital. Basically, how do they save their money? If they save money in US dollars, then that's really what the money is for global exchange, for a globally money, even though the nominal exchange can be done in some local currencies. And so from this perspective, US dollar is, I would say, unrivaled at this point. It may be the only sort of alternative and credible alternative is gold, and that's why U.S. Federal Reserve is extremely concerned, because if they continue devaluing purchasing power of U.S. dollars so quickly, most of the world will start switching to gold, and that's actually a real true currency, and that's real where the real danger for US dollar, not in Kenyan shillings or Chinese yuan or Russian rubles or whatever else it is, because all of those currencies are even more flawed than the US dollar. Now let's sort of continue on this Africa topic there. Basically, if you remember, I mentioned that Wagner Group managed to basically take control of several countries in Africa, and if you remember, even some of those countries like Chad started expropriating property of the U.S. companies. So the U.S. is sort of doing its diplomatic move. It's sending vice president to visit Africa, countries such as Zambia, Ghana, and Tanzania. I don't think that any of those are really a threat in terms of like they sort of will move to sort of Chinese sphere of influence, but at the same time, it's very clear that U.S. is concerned what's going on in Africa, which is slowly but surely switching under Chinese and Russian influence. Speaking about the money and currency, and this is for those who believe that Russian president is sort of conservative or stands on conservative values, I would say this is very delusional thinking. And example is Russia passed the law about that there will be about introduction of central bank digital currency. So digital Russian ruble, obviously. So they already started sort of preparation in April, May. They basically doing all necessary sort of actions, and they will try to implement it as soon as starting June. We'll see what comes out of it, but as you can see, this is way ahead of the West, and it's certainly not aligning with conservative values for those who think that Russia upholds conservative values. That's as far from reality as possible. Also, then a little bit again, Russia and Persian Gulf. So there is news that at least 4,000 Russian millionaires left Russia for United Arab Emirates in 2022. So basically, essentially, majority of the rich people in Russia fleeing the war, fleeing the situation in Russia, and they just decided to, to sort of survive the situation in UAE. So this is very interesting and very different, because in the past, all those wealthy Russians, they would go to mostly Europe. So as you can see, there is a very clear shift in the move of capital from the West to the Persian Gulf. In a way, Persian Gulf becomes sort of what Switzerland used to be. And specifically, I would single out United Arab Emirates. It's becoming sort of center for wealthy people, and center where there is quite a bit of sort of freedom for outsiders there. And so for that reason, you see that a lot of them um, moving there. Now let's a little bit about Russia. Russia actively exporting, and I mentioned this many times before, actively exporting its energy commodities. So there was news that Russia just sold a huge amount of gas oil to Malaysia and Singapore. Singapore obviously doesn't consume that much. They probably will it's a trader, they will just resell it. At the same time, Russian grain is a little bit threatened. Large Western grain traders are leaving Russia. So a couple days ago, Cargill announced, this is U.S. company, like one of the largest grain traders. They announced that they're going to be leaving Russia. And then also another one, Viterra, announced that they're going to be leaving Russia. I would say it's not going to change honestly anything, if it's not going to be if it's not going to go through intermediary named Viterra or Cargill, there will be someone else who will step in and will pocket the difference in the buy and sell price. So this is definitely not going to create true meaningful problem for Russia, because it's very, like, grain is very liquid. It's definitely not crude oil, but if you give discount, there's always interested parties and buyers, and I would say China would be number one, as you can imagine. They don't have food security there, so they always interested in buying grain. They actually used to buy grain in Ukraine, and also were doing how to say. Kind of like deals where they try to use that to kind of like gain control over the country, over the political class. So this was actually during in like about 2012 time frame, when there was that president who was a Russian puppet. His name Yanukovych. So he was basically taking loans from China for like 3, 4, 5 years in exchange for supplying a large amount of grains. But since the country is not, this is all obviously private farmers, they obviously could not supply that grain, and China tried to use it as a leverage, but it actually didn't work out, because those people, they don't stick to agreements. They just basically said, tough luck, China, and China had tough luck there in Ukraine. Then in terms of Russian military, I mentioned several days ago that the existing commander of the group V, which is here, this area, was dismissed for horrific results with the attack on Vuhledar. So there is a new one. His name is Andrei Kuzmenko. There's not much information. The only information so far is that he is actually coming from sort of real, I'd say from real military unit, from the kind of like bottom up kind of. So that's that he's not someone who kind of like skipped being the commander of actual military unit. He was commanding 17th Mechanized Brigade in the Russian army, so he's actually have real life experience, and he understands how things work at their sort of at the soldier level, at the trench level. Whether he's going to be better or not remains to be seen. But this preliminary information kind of speaks in favor of him. At the same, and obviously it's a negative for Ukraine. But we'll see if he is actually more capable, because he may continue the same suicidal attacks in that area or areas nearby. That's all in terms of sort of general strategic news. And now let's switch to the front line. I'm gonna do in a clockwise fashion, as always, starting from very north. So the situation along the state border is, as always, tense. There are, call it, infiltration attempts from Ukrainian side into Russian territory in Bryansk region. This is being done by the like sort of like Russian volunteers who fight. There is a unit. I don't know to what extent it's real or not. Sometimes it looks like more like a it's nominal than real unit, but basically they basically infiltrate into Russian territories and try to sort of do this propaganda actions there. They obviously cannot change anything, but sort of it works for propaganda pretty well, at least right now. Now let's jump to North Lugansk front line. So things here are relatively quiet. There's some Russian attack here near Stelmachivka, but essentially it's sort of somewhat frozen, this section, so this front line here. Now let's move to North Donbass front line. Things here are more or less the same. In terms of advances in Bakhmut, it's essentially stalled for the Russian side. It's very hard to really understand exactly where the front line goes inside of the sort of town. From my understanding, the Russian side managed to clear this area here in the south of Bakhmut, but essentially it's a slow, painful squeeze that can last for some time unless Ukrainian command decides to just simply pull out and sort of and stop this agony. But this agony can last for a while because, as we can all know and see, Russian troops are exhausted, and specifically Wagner mercenaries, which were main sort of tool, main resource, and for that reason there are more. There were regular Russian troops brought into the area. Hard to actually understand and see where exactly they are, but now it's not just exclusively Wagner mercenaries. Again, because of the attrition there and no new fresh blood. And so far, this whole recruiting activity that they're doing inside of Russia, they think they have like 40 plus recruiting centers in most of the Russian regions, and it doesn't seem that there is much success there. So they're definitely not getting the flow that they would be getting through the prisons. So that's update here, and this slow mid grinder can continue without much change for some time. So this is just a quick sort of recap of how it looked over time. So as you can see, most of the advances were done like mid of February, essentially end of February. So again, this is the situation more or less the same. Even this village, Orikhovo-Vasilievka, which is key right now, Wagner mercenaries cannot even capture at this point that village, essentially. Now let's move to this central Donbass front line. Things here also stable in the sense that Ukrainian troops don't lose the ground. So there is definitely threatening situation around Avdiivka, but it has stabilized. So again, things have not changed since at least March 24. And I mentioned before that initial breakthrough happened on March 18/19, where there were most of the Russian successes, and also they followed up on the 20th. But since then, they were pushed back over this railroad line, and things have stabilized. Situation here is definitely in Avdiivka not perfect, somewhat similar to the Bakhmut, but Not as bad in terms of Ukrainian side, just because we don't have here Wagner mercenaries at this point. This is how it sort of was developing, as you can see. This is this attack that was very dangerous for Ukrainian side, where Russian troops started to sort of maintain partial control over this village Stepove, which is kind of like a bridgehead over this railroad, and then then you really just need to jump close to this village Orlivka, which is the hub, how the supply is happening is here. So if you come close enough, you essentially cutting off supply and forcing withdrawal from Avdiivka. Now let's jump to the last section of the front, which is Zaporizhya. Things are quiet so far here. That's it for today. Thanks for watching. Until next time. Bye bye.